I want to go back a ways from the line of scrimmage and focus on the phenomenon that I believe here is very much like a development takes place gradually over a long period of time, and then suddenly things start to move very, very quickly. I think that this is an example of this. James Madison, in his famous passage in Federalist 10, said that a large, extended republic would feature such a range and disparity of interests that the sheer political cacophony would prevent any one or a few interests from capturing control of the government, putting together congressional majorities to pass national laws in their own interests. Modern communications have abolished Madison by making our nation much smaller and tighter, better connected. Particular interests and enthusiasms can step onto the national stage. They can secure national laws directly through the administrative state. This has been going on for a very long time. It was in the 1960s that we built our first national networks of commercial jet aircraft travel and the basic structure of the interstate highway system, which made transportation among Americans over any distance at all much, much faster than they had ever been before. Long-distance telephone calls were still very expensive, but their price fell by 50% during the 1960s and a factor of 10 during the 1970s, heading rapidly towards zero. In the 60s, television ownership became universal, and the 3 TV networks introduced a radical innovation nobody'd ever heard before called the nighttime nightly news. During the dinner hour, a half hour, then a full hour of highly produced news from around the country and world that became very, very popular. These innovations brought us a new era of national mass politics. It was first, I think, apparent and effective in national government during the Civil Rights Revolution, where television brought scenes from Birmingham, Alabama, many examples of violent suppression of African Americans in the South that Northerners had never really seen before, and then brought Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech before an enormous crowd in Washington, D.C. This was actually new, and it played an important role in the passage of our Civil Rights Act of '64 and Voting Rights Act of '65. Other things were going on, and one institution that didn't know what was happening, an old line institution, was called General Motors. An unknown young lawyer named Ralph Nader organized a one-man campaign on behalf of automobile safety and published a book in the mid-'60s, Unsafe at Any Speed, that became a surprise bestseller. General Motors knew how to deal with this kind of situation. They surveilled him, they tapped his telephone, they tried to entrap him with a prostitute. They didn't know their man. All of this became public very, very quickly. National news about what GM was trying to do to this man. Congress promptly responded by creating the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The innovations in communications also lowered the cost of politics. On the demand side, where society organizes and tries to get government to respond, it became cheap and easy to form interest groups for every conceivable cause. Before the 1960s, Washington domestic politics was about management-labor relations. It involved some aspects of employment and unemployment, but basically it was controlled by a few large unions, trade associations, manufacturers. With this change in politics that we saw in the 60s, by the end of the 60s, Congress was swamped with proposals it had never seen before for environmental protection, for health safety, occupational health and safety, consumer protection, automobile safety, as I've said. And the anti-discrimination civil rights laws that we passed suddenly had a long line of people that wanted to be added to the list of groups that cannot be discriminated against. Congress could not handle this new situation. It could only handle a few issues at a time. It was designed to be a very awkward organization, to be representative. We could only have laws if they had attracted a strong majority of two separately constituted legislative bodies. That made it very hard to pass laws. That's what Madison had in mind. But Congress responded to this deluge of demands with this idea, like NHTSA, of creating agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, many, many more. When this happened, the first thing that happened was this idea that different interests would cancel each other out. It stopped operating because these agencies could be multiplied without, endlessly multiplied, and they could issue laws on their own. You didn't have to go to Congress anymore. You could go to these very powerful agencies and obtain laws with very small, often groups that disagreed with each other, but very, very different from Congress, and law began to multiply. On the supply side, communications meant that the legislator could now begin to organize his or own careers outside of the traditions of party, chairman of committees. You could now form interest groups supporting your career all on your own. This actually started happening in the 1970s. In the middle of the 1970s, Congress opened up its proceedings to television, and it converted all of its committee hearings, even markup committee meetings where everybody gets together and they actually write the legislation, and there's a lot of dickering and compromise and people having to settle for half a loaf. Now suddenly, all of the interest groups were kind of sitting around watching everything that was going on. So you couldn't make compromises anymore. The result was that the legislator stopped being a cog in a complicated, obscure process that we kind of all step out of the room like a jury at the end of a trial and kind of announce our decision and announce what the legislation is. Now everything was in public, and legislators started becoming important public figures. And they thought that they didn't have to make laws anymore. The laws were being made downtown. They had become lobbyists with badges for the executive agencies, and they would issue press releases condemning or lauding whatever was happening downtown for the benefit of the interest groups behind them, either ideological or commercial, and they developed a new business model. As I said, this was happening for many decades. With the arrival of the internet in the 1990s and the iPhone and then social media in the 2000s, things have advanced dramatically. A few years ago, I was at the Republican caucus in the Senate, the weekly Wednesday lunch, to discuss tariff legislation. Donald Trump, the president, discovered that he could change tariff rates himself. The Republicans, they had ideas about tariffs. The Democrats had ideas about tariffs. All they needed to do was take back the power. We walked into lunch, and I thought there was a piece of paper in front of everybody's lunch setting, and it had a list of bullet points. And I figured this was different legislative drafts. One person thinks this, one person thinks that. We're going to chew it over and describe. No, it was greatest Republican tweets of the week. And that's what we talked about. And the other side was most nasty and terrible Democratic tweets of the week. This is what people think about up in the legislature right now. About 2 years ago, Joni Ernst, the Republican senator from Iowa, was so frustrated at the end of a markup committee that she came out and in front of all the cameras, she said, this business of having our legislative markups, with all the Democrats, all the Republicans around the time being public, we can't get anything done. I think we should at least experiment with having private markup sessions. It was hysterical what happened. The entirety of the media universe came down on the shoulders of this enemy of the First Amendment. All New York Times, Fox News, within 24 hours, Senator Ernst had publicly recanted. She would never again propose or even think about such a thing as making the final deliberations of Congress private. So everything has become public. It has made the whole idea of representative law obsolete. Law is done by special interest groups bureaucratically. The idea that we have give and take to arrive at a big consensus over the laws we live under has gone away. And I think there's a certain partisan valence to this, but I think that this change is cooked into the technology.